Hello to one and all, and welcome to the ride. You join me on my Royal Enfield Classic 500 on a brief excursion I made in Worcestershire, just dipping a little into Herefordshire at the end of August in 2022. The place I visited first has a connection to a celebrated composer from the Civil War era, one Thomas Tompkins. He's remembered as a composer of choral music, beautiful Renaissance style music that was carried over into the Baroque era. When he died in 1656, he was buried at this village of Martin Hussingtree, but no one knows exactly where in the graveyard. Serving Charles I, he was on the losing side of the Civil War after all. The Church of St Michael and All Angels is a Grade 1 listed building. The west wall is 12th century in origin, and the remainder of the church was built in the early 13th century. Inside there's a plaque honouring the composer, Thomas Tompkins, composer, buried in this churchyard, 1656. His presence somewhere nearby is acknowledged at least. Having stopped for Tompkins, it's time to rejoin the lovely Worcestershire lanes. Salwarpe's a village less than 2 miles southwest of the town of Droitwich Spa, but in open country. It's situated between the Droitwich Canal and the River Salwarpe. I came here because it looked interesting on the map, sandwiched between river and canal, a sort of island. And there's the Droitwich Canal, which here accompanies the River Salwarpe to join the River Severn at Hawford. It was built to carry salt, abandoned in 1939, but restored in 2010 for leisure use. The church is unusually large for a village now so small, but it reflects greater importance in past centuries. Parts of the church were built not long after the Norman conquest. Down below me is the canal, The official opening was in 1771, and it was a commercial success, until the coming of the railways, of course. Whilst officially abandoned in 1939, the last boat to use the canal was pulled along in 1916. The plaque on the old school tells that it was established in 1607 and used until 1882. The yew trees in this churchyard are of an immense age. The old school and the large church tell of a large agricultural community that once lived here, self-contained, with its own flour mill. It's a short walk down the old main street to the river, on the opposite side of the village to the canal. The River Salwarpe, a shadow of its full flowing self in these dry summer months. From this bridge you can see Mill House. Mill in name only though. The old mill stood in front of Mill House on the river that turned its wheel, but that was demolished in 1942. What looks like a small bridge here probably went over the Mill Leat. As I return along the old main street, I can sense what must have been a bustling scene of community and rural life. And now it's a peaceful place in which to live, and for tourists like me to visit. Back to the bike now for the next leg of my mini tour. I followed the River Salwarpe down to near where it meets the River Severn at a place called Horford. I'm on my way to see an ancient building, small, but by the look of the photographs, perfectly formed. It's the last remnant of a former medieval monastic grange, a curious crooked dovecot which sits prettily in the Worcestershire countryside. During the 16th and 17th centuries, those who could afford it built beautiful towers just for pigeons. These were blocks of flats for hundreds of pigeons who were waiting to be eaten by their landlords. This picturesque dovecot has survived unaltered since the late 16th century. It's built to an unusual design, with a weather-boarded gable on each of its four sides, meeting in a central peak. It's now maintained by the National Trust. And from one quaint corner of rural Worcestershire, I'm now heading towards another. I've just ridden through the Worcestershire village of Whichenford, having crossed the River Severn at Holt Fleet. I'm looking for the farm buildings next to Wichenford Court, an old moated manor house dating back at least to the 15th century. Here are the farm buildings, and here too is the entrance gate. It's not the manor house that I've come to see. That's a private dwelling without access. Rather, I've come to see a much smaller building constructed to serve the occupants of Wichenford Court. Through this deserted farmyard, there's just no one around. It's as though it's been abandoned. And there it is, again. A small but perfectly formed building. Wichenford dovecot is another 17th century timber framed block of flats for pigeons. It's built to a square plan, with walls of wattle and daub infill, and stands on that sandstone plinth. It's topped by a tiled roof with a central cupola for birds to enter. There are 560 nesting boxes arranged in 14 rows, with 10 in each row. The dovecot was restored sometime in the last century and like the one at Hawford, is maintained by the National Trust. It sits directly beside the remnants of the court's medieval moat. You might just see the water through the trees there. The location is idyllic, and you can't help but be overwhelmed by a sense of timelessness in this spot. At first I was fooled by the chain on the dovecot's small door, but that was soon lifted and an entrance made. Above are the nesting boxes arranged neatly in rows, and the centre of the dovecot is open to the rafters. Unchanged since the 17th century when it was built. It's time to move on, but not before crossing the lane just to take a brief look at Whichenford Church, which, like the manor, stands apart from today's village. In the Middle Ages, the village hovels probably would have stood between the church and the manor house. The housing then shifted north along the road to Worcester. They may have been cleared off by the lord of the manor, or the pull of the Worcester road was the reason. Perhaps the conditions were drier up there. There can be many reasons why a village moves. But also now I must move on to the next leg of this mini tour, which takes me into Herefordshire. You find me now on the narrow lanes of East Herefordshire, and that's the sign I'm looking for to the right. I'm on my way to the tiny hilltop village, if it could be called that, of Edvin Loach. The once tarmacked road has deteriorated here into a semi-rough track. The curious place name originated in the 11th century, apparently, when the land around here was divided between the Loaches and the Ralph families, hence the present names of the local parishes. The one I'm going to see, Edvin Loach, and a neighbouring one called Edwin Ralph. Here we are, once the location of a Norman motte and bailey castle, with glorious countryside all around. It had commanding views over the landscape. Again, apart from that truck, which may belong to a local farmer or someone, I'm completely alone up here. Let's take a look. This graveyard was once the outer bailey of a hilltop castle, built shortly after the Norman invasion. That's the new Victorian church dead ahead. But before we get to that, there's an old ruined one to see first. And here it is. Just look at the old yew trees on either side of the entrance to the ruined church. They're possibly as old as the church. Just look too at the herringbone pattern stonework on the north and south walls. Very distinctive. There's a simple layout, essentially a single space divided into three areas. That's the chancel end at the east end of the church. And that's the remnants of the tower at the west end, and I'm stood in the middle, in the nave. This ruined church, when new, was actually built within the castle walls. It It's very early Norman, 11th century, probably built on the site of a Saxon predecessor. Outside, the tower is clearly visible, and that ancient yew tree, again, like the others, must be hundreds of years old. The church continued in use until around the 1860s, when I suppose it became too dilapidated and a new church was built next door. Or someone simply wanted to modernise and get a new church built. And they certainly went to the top man. It's designed by the great Victorian architect Sir George Gilbert Scott. You'll notice when I pan round to the left of the tower, you might just make out the Norman castle earth mound, or motte, on top of which the keep would have stood. Glorious old yew trees everywhere. Look at the hinges on that door. Works of art in their own right. Inside, the church is plain and simple, with substantial roof beams. On leaving the church, I scanned around to see if I could see any remnants of the old castle. Nothing, only the levelled ground of the bailey, but the strategic hilltop location is there for all to see. I'm now about to cross over the Leigh Brook. Here's the bridge, on my way to the village of Leigh, with its famous medieval landmark just west of Worcester. From Edvin Loach, I rode over the Bromyard Downs, back into Worcestershire at Sapey Bridge, then to Nightwick, keeping to the high ground south of the River Team, passing through Alfrick for arriving here at Leigh. I'm pulling up alongside the Norman church of St Edburga, which was built by monks from Pershaw Abbey in 1100. But that's not the landmark I've come to see, glorious though it is. The entrance to the one I have come to see is a curious affair, squeezing as it does around the perimeter of Leigh Court, a lovely house and garden. To my right are the lawns next to the driveway that lead to the old manor house. There's a quick glimpse before something happened there of the church. 1100 that was built. It feels strange. I feel as though I'm intruding on a private space, but there's the sign I'm looking for. And that's what I've come to see, the great medieval barn of Leigh Court. I'll just juggle through this entrance gate. An outstanding example of English medieval architecture and carpentry above all, and at over 46 yards long, the largest crux frame structure in Britain. Built for Pershore Abbey, they say, in about 1325. It strikes you as a modern building inside. I mean, clearly it's old, of course, but a fashionable architect of today, building in wood, would do well to better the construction principles of this medieval building with its huge unobstructed floor space. It has 18 crook blades, each made from a single oak tree. These huge ribs support the main structure, and thanks no doubt to its size and sturdy construction, the barn has survived largely unaltered for 700 years. A great way to end my mini tour of the Worcestershire Herefordshire borderlands. But now it's time to move on and enjoy the remainder of a lovely summer's day on two wheels. If you'd like to join me again on some future ride seeking out the quaint, quirky and historic, simply like, subscribe and perhaps even share. I'll then let you know when I'm next out and about. And when you've done that, perhaps take a look at my other videos. Above all, thanks for riding along with me today. I've enjoyed your company. For now, I'm done.